Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to what is an unusual type of video for me to make. Welcome to this video title, the tell-all Facebook, the Facebook Hi everyone, it's me, Jess. Welcome to this video. This is an unusual type of video for me to make for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I'm going to be talking about a nonfiction book today, actually a memoir. You would have seen on the thumbnail that the memoir I'm talking about is Careless People, the Facebook Whistleblower Tell-All by Wynn-Williams. I don't usually do standalone review videos, but today I decided it would be a good idea because there is so much to talk about with Careless People that I knew it would take up too much time in a recent reads video. And because it's a nonfiction book, my approach to talking about this book is going to be a little bit different. Whenever you read something nonfiction, I think there is the idea that you want to read something that's well written because that helps to engage the reader. But also because it's a memoir and because it's coming from the voice of someone who's not necessarily a writer, you have to make allowances for that when you're reading a book like this. So I'm more going to be talking about some of the controversy around the book, the allegations that Wynn-Williams makes in the book, and whether she's credible or not. How has Meta responded to this? Just talking about the book and the circumstances surrounding this book. I know that this video is coming a little bit later than, right at the moment when this was all happening. The book was released in April of 2025. I didn't pick it up until a couple of months ago when I was at a local bookstore. I was at a bookstore called Pulp here in Montreal, and there was one book left sitting on the table. I don't normally buy hardback. For those of you who follow me, you'll know that. And the bookseller was very skilled in getting me to buy this book because he said, oh, it's been shadow banned. You better get it before you can't get it anymore. And then I thought, oh, okay. I mean, I was interested in the subject matter and I thought it would be good to talk about on the channel. So I picked it up and then I went home and I thought, what does it even mean when a book is shadow banned? So that is the point where I am going to start this conversation. I did look up what does it mean for a book to be shadow banned. So shadow banning typically means that a social media platform is suppressing the information about a book or a topic purposefully. So censoring online on social media platforms, the person's content, their posts, their profile, hiding posts from followers, for example, deprioritizing them in feeds and making them hard to discover by not promoting or pushing the content through the algorithm. A shadow banning is not a formal banning of a book, and it's not an order of suppression when it comes to the legal interpretation. So looking into this, Meta did a lot to try to stop this book from being published. They've responded to some of the accusations that are made in this memoir. They did take Wynn-Williams to court. They claimed that the book was in violation of a non-disparagement agreement that she had signed when she left her job at the company. They had pretty limited success in suppressing this book. It's become a bestseller. So note to self, people out there, when you try to stop something from getting out, oftentimes it becomes more popular. All of the news around it made people want to buy it and certainly gave the salesperson at Pulp a selling point for selling it to me. We always want to read something that's forbidden or that we're not supposed to, or find out, what is behind the curtain. And this book very much attempts to do this. In the end, an arbitrator actually ordered Wynn-Williams to stop actively promoting the book, and she herself was ordered to refrain from making disparaging or critical remarks about Meta and to retract certain statements to the extent within her control that she'd already made. So there's no credible evidence in the end that Meta or any other platform has shadow banned this book. They've actually gone through legal channels to try to suppress this book. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was some element of that happening, even though there's no evidence of it. But the legal ruling itself is pretty explicit, and it's a public legal ruling, and it was done through arbitration. So it's not any kind of behind-the-scenes moderation policy necessarily that we're aware of, or manipulation of the algorithm. The question is, was this author's voice being suppressed? Yes, to some degree, but in this very legal way where they found that Meta's case would be fairly strong, that she was violating the terms of her discharge agreement, the non-disparagement agreement that she signed. She herself is legally barred from promoting or distributing the book herself. The publisher is still able to promote and distribute the book. The book, of course, is still being published. I'm not sure if it's going to come out in paperback or not. I would imagine it probably will eventually. It's certainly being reviewed. I'm reviewing it. We'll see what happens. I don't know if this video will get suppressed or not. And like I said, it's become a bestseller. What Meta claimed is that when Sarah Wynn-Williams left the company in 2017, she signed a severance agreement that included a clause promising not to publicly disparage Meta. And Meta argues that the book and her public statements about it violate this agreement. So let's get into what some of the claims are that Sarah Wynn-Williams makes in Careless People. There are many. I teach in business, so I'm aware of some of these claims. I'd heard about them before. But some of them I was surprised by and didn't know about. In particular, the ethics and moral compromises that Facebook has made, or maybe continues to make, particularly in their global expansion and from a foreign policy perspective, and especially when it came to their expansion into China. Sarah Wynn-Williams has alleged that Facebook was willing to build and expand tools for its presence in China that would comply with censorship demands by the Chinese government. She also claims that they were developing moderation tools and pipelines for content suppression in order to gain a market entry into the Chinese market. So the Chinese government would have put these conditions on Facebook's entry into the Chinese market, and she claims that Zuckerberg and the Facebook team was so eager to access the Chinese market that they were willing to make these ethical and moral compromises, particularly when it came to free speech and to content moderation. In addition, she talks about how Facebook had agreed, at least in the pilot program, to share user data and user information, including user data and user information for people living in Hong Kong, and identify dissident content and identify the producers of that content, and even to identify non-Chinese citizens who were engaging with that content in other countries. As we've moved on from the time in 2017 when this was happening to today, this is really troubling because Facebook is such a powerful platform. Remember, Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp. This demonstrates a troubling willingness to aid authoritarian regimes at the expense of free expression and human rights, as well as serious privacy violations when it comes to those expressing dissent towards the government. What I had already known about Facebook, which she also talks about, is the spread of misinformation and hate speech, particularly at a point when there is some kind of conflict or crisis. In this case, it was in Myanmar, but in any foreign crisis, you could see that this could happen. Or at home. But unfortunately, I think many of us are still not admitting to ourselves or accepting how powerful Facebook has been and social media is in creating divisiveness and hate. If we were, we wouldn't be on those social media platforms. I know that we've tried to move over to different media platforms, and I myself am on Instagram, so I'm as guilty of this, and it really is a paradox for people. But I think it's important to understand the implications. That's why I'm making this video. And I'm glad that she wrote this book. I'll get to her credibility in just a moment. So she claims that they didn't do enough in Myanmar. And if you don't know the case of Myanmar, there wasn't an adequate level of content moderation. The content that was being posted by Facebook users in Myanmar, there were delays, there were problems with language interpretation, and the policies of Facebook's content moderation weren't adequately localized for Myanmar, for the region. For that reason, there was a ton of misinformation and hate speech that was distributed and led to real-world harm. In 2022, Amnesty International wrote that Facebook's systems promoted violence against the Rohingya. Their report details how Meta knew or should have known that Facebook's algorithmic systems were supercharging the spread of harmful anti-Rohingya content in Myanmar, but the company still failed to act. And in 2017, for those of you who don't know, the Rohingya were killed, tortured, raped, and displaced in the thousands as part of the Myanmar Security Forces campaign of ethnic cleansing. Her role in all of this, of course, is impossible to determine, and that's where we get into more of the he said, she said elements of the disclosures in the memoir, particularly around the behavior of Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg and her direct supervisor, Jill Kaplan, who she claims sexually harassed her, and that was the reason why she was fired from Facebook. The official line from Meta and Facebook is that she was fired for poor performance and toxic behavior, but she claims in her book that she was terminated in retaliation for accusing her boss, Joel Kaplan, of sexual harassment. So this is another big claim that she makes: gender discrimination, inappropriate conduct, and sexual harassment. She also alleges that there were very uncomfortable demands and interactions during her maternity leave and her pregnancy. She had been pressured to continue working and to pump her breast milk. There was just a general insensitivity to her health. She was hospitalized at one point during her pregnancy, and she was still calling into work from the hospital room. The kind of thing you would not be surprised to hear about a tech company, the kind of thing that we've been aware of for a long time in terms of the demands, and particularly demands for women. But what makes it a bit ironic for Facebook is the public display or the public presentation of leadership in support of women leaders by Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote the book called Lean In, which encourages women to lean in to corporate positions and to corporate decision-making. I haven't read that book. So she talks about how Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg were very concerned about their public image, but in many ways what they speak about and how they present themselves is a contradiction to how they behaved within the company and their expectations and attitudes towards employees at Facebook. It does seem as if Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg surround themselves with employees who do their bidding, and that in some cases their requests are quite unreasonable. She tells a story about them playing Catan, that Mark Zuckerberg was playing Catan with her and he was upset that she wasn't letting him win. So kind of petty and childish behavior on the part particularly of Mark Zuckerberg, and on the part of Sheryl Sandberg, unrealistic expectations of women in their roles at Facebook. Basically leadership problems and stories of real hypocrisy when it comes to the real leadership values that exist at the company. For example, espousing this work-life balance or the empowerment of women while privately acting in ways that really contradict them. The examples of her treatment during her pregnancy and many other examples, including from other female employees unnamed in the memoir. She certainly describes a culture that's a toxic culture, a culture of overwork, of blurred or non-existent boundaries between the personal life and work life, and expectations of extreme dedication on the part of employees. She also alleges sexual harassment claims against Sheryl Sandberg. She describes one incident where another female coworker was sharing a bed with Sheryl Sandberg and where she was told she needed to come to the bed and be in bed with her. So that was a bit shocking to me. That was surprising to me. I don't know very much about Sheryl Sandberg, but I find that a bit surprising. Maybe I shouldn't, but I found the behavior that was described quite shocking. Wynn-Williams herself writes about her own ideals and hopes and her moral sense or her moral integrity being degraded by having worked for Facebook for so long. She describes it as being gradually worn down over time. What had seemed to her at first like a mission to connect the world, because she came from a background of foreign policy at the UN or environmental policy at the UN. She came to Facebook with the pitch that they needed a foreign policy advisor and that she was the right person for that job. And that was how she eventually got hired. She saw Facebook, the platform, as a very powerful platform, but as a platform that could work for the positive, that could work for progress, that could work for people. I do believe that that was her intention, but that once she got there, those desires and hope were really overshadowed by the desire on the part of the executive to grow the company internationally, putting growth and profits ahead of any kind of ethical or moral consideration. She also talks about her own health. She opens the book with a shark attack. It's a pretty exciting opening to this book. Talks about her own health a lot in the book, her family life, her pregnancies, and how she personally suffered from the expectations of working at Facebook in this toxic culture and the unrealistic demands that were put on her and the lack of support that she felt she had from the company. She also claims that there were a lot of concerns amongst the employees at Facebook about hate speech, about misinformation, and about content that could lead to harm, and that flags were raised about these concerns over and over and over and over again, and that they were ignored or dismissed. She also claims that actions that Facebook promised or claimed publicly were sometimes superficial or just window dressing compared to what was actually happening behind closed doors at the company. So a lot of promising to do better, to make changes, and not actually making those changes or doing better. So how did Facebook or Meta respond to these claims? Meta disputes mostly the content of these claims in the book as being out of date. So they've already happened, they're in the past, or that the accusations are false. I mean, it's like a he said, she said. They also assert that there were workplace compliant investigations made, and from those workplace compliant investigations, her claims were found to be misleading or unfounded. And particularly on the situation in China and the censorship allegations, Meta says they explored these ideas a long time ago, but that they did not implement or currently operate a service in China that is censored in the way that she implies in her book. So on censorship in China, Wynn writes, I witnessed discussions about building tools that could comply with Beijing's demands. Filtering content, suppressing dissent. The company's leadership insisted this was exploratory, but behind closed doors, the appetite to get into China was real, no matter the cost. And then on Myanmar, she wrote, in Myanmar, our failure to act swiftly meant hate speech and misinformation spread unchecked. I raised alarms, but the machine moved too slowly, more concerned with optics than outcomes. And then in terms of the toxic work culture and the personal toll that it would take on people working there, she wrote, at Facebook, you weren't just working long hours, you were expected to become Facebook. Your identity, your health, even your family life blurred into the company's relentless pace. I lost myself, trying to live up to the image of the ideal employee. So a lot of people have criticized Sarah Wynn-Williams for working at Facebook for 7 years, particularly knowing what she knew. She does write in her memoir about how she agonized about staying or leaving. She was obviously being paid a very high salary. I think that that's fair to question that, but I also think that it takes a lot of courage to be a whistleblower. So even though she maybe came around to doing the right thing late, maybe she was trying to change from the inside. I would give her credit for that based on what I've read and just based on knowing how difficult it is in a toxic environment to, like how manipulative a toxic environment can be and how much your self-worth gets tied into your performance, which it sounds like she suffered from that. I just don't think that's a good enough criticism to use to call into question the claims that she makes. Just in terms of how credible is Sarah Wynn-Williams, I would say from reading this memoir that her credibility is fairly strong, especially for, if we take this for what it is, as a subjective insider perspective on working at the company. The fact that she held a very high-level position and has documentation that she's used legal channels and her claims mesh with a lot of what has already been reported gives this memoir more weight, in my opinion. But it's not, every claim is not proven. So many of her more personal claims or the more controversial claims really do remain contested, and it really is a case of he said, she said, or she said, in the case of Sheryl Sandberg. There's been no real independent investigation or other witnesses to really corroborate, or even public documents to corroborate what she writes about. So we have to treat this memoir as a serious source, but one that might need some corroboration on some of the more extreme or the more specific stories. In terms of the implications of Facebook's reach and revelations about the way that Facebook impacted the 2016 elections, which is also discussed a bit in this book, her account certainly adds a lot of backstory and a point of view on that from inside the company. We do know from other corroborating sources that Facebook absolutely, for Brexit and for the election in 2016, targeted information to particular users based on what their values were and what their preferences were in terms of policy outcomes. Some of that specific information targeting would have been in contradiction with other policies that they might not have agreed with. This idea of creating these silos and echo chambers, which is something that Facebook and the algorithm does very, very effectively, and then feeds those silos, particularly feeding those silos with hate speech, is chilling and is something that we should all be very, very aware of and very, very worried about. Sarah Wynn-Williams, just to take note, has testified before the US Senate and submitted documents. Some claims, particularly about China, content moderation tools, and internal discussions, are backed by her testimony. But again, it's her testimony. She has both government and policy experience, as well as tech policy experience. And her role at Facebook was Director of Global Public Policy. And she worked there from 2011 till 2017. Williams also writes directly about the leaked documents that revealed Facebook's practice of targeting vulnerable teens for advertising. The company's response, of course, at the time was to downplay or deny the issue, but internal documents do show that this type of emotional targeting was common practice, and that the leadership knowingly approved a false statement to the public to protect their business model. And in general, throughout the book, Sarah is lamenting the company's lack of basic decency that she had witnessed over and over and over and over again. She describes some horrible stories. One of a contract worker convulsing on the floor while employees ignore her and continue to work. Another international situation that she writes about in the book that I found quite shocking, and a situation in South Korea where Facebook had actually outstanding arrest warrants in South Korea because of Facebook's active disregard for Korean gaming regulations. And they sent Sarah as a quote unquote body to test, to kind of call their bluff to see if a Facebook employee would be arrested. And she decided not to go because of how serious she felt the situation was. And they sent another employee instead. The other employee was not arrested, but the idea that Facebook would be willing to send an employee or put an employee in harm's way contributes to the lack of concern for employees and also the lack of concern for any type of regulation that might get in the way of Facebook's aspirations internationally. In terms of the international expansion into foreign markets, she writes Mark didn't have a theory of how he and the company should be in the world. He didn't really have developed opinions about policy or politics beyond signing up more users. Now he's developed priorities, and they're mostly pretty horrible and ignorant of the human costs. One of the more chilling revelations in the memoir is Mark Zuckerberg's desire. At one point, Sarah describes his desire to run for president. Of course, we've seen him photographed along with the other tech bros with President Trump. He officially denies this aspiration, but Facebook approved a stock structure that allows Mark to leave for government service without losing control of his company. In terms of the involvement in the US election, she writes, if anything, Facebook rewards outsider candidates who post inflammatory content that drives engagement. We charge less money for ads that are more incendiary and reach more people. Trump is using our system the way it's designed to be used. From my point of view, that's incentivizing and rewarding the worst kinds of political ugliness. Joel doesn't seem to care at all. It's all money. And what harm does it do? He tells us it's clear Clinton's going to win. Sarah reflects on Myanmar closer to the end of that section. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what unfolded next in Myanmar and Facebook's complicity. It wasn't because of some grander vision or any malevolence towards Muslims in the country, nor a lack of money. My conclusion, it was just that Joel, Elliot, Sheryl, and Mark didn't give a fuck. So I don't know. I think this should be called Ruthless People. I know that the Careless People title is a reference to The Great Gatsby, but I always think about the movie Ruthless People. Was there a movie called Ruthless People? I think so. So let's bring this back to kind of a conclusion or the bottom line. This book isn't just a memoir or a tell-all. It's an important piece of the conversation or debate about social responsibility and big tech. It's really a vital contribution to that debate. She offers a rare glimpse into the conflicts inherent in these tech companies between profits, politics, and ethics. And that is the case for all digital platforms. As users, us, consumers, voters, or even advocates, some of us, the choices that we make will really influence whether companies like Meta are held accountable, are allowed to operate unchecked. The issues raised demand reflection, but they also demand action. How do we balance innovation with the need for privacy and the protection of human rights? What role should governments play in protecting people, particularly users on social media, like young teenage girls or young men, really everybody? So how should these companies be regulating content so that we balance free speech, but you also control for hate speech or misinformation? And is that even possible? Or at what cost? A cost that these tech companies are apparently unwilling to take on. At the end of the day, what responsibility lies with these companies? Does it lie with us as the consumer? Does it lie with the company? Does it lie with the government? Is it a shared responsibility? It's really a wake-up call if Myanmar wasn't a wake-up call, or if the election wasn't a wake-up call, or if the report revealing Facebook's behavior when it came to promoting advertisements to young teenage women weren't wake-up calls. This is yet another wake-up call. These technologies that are shaping our society are only as ethical as the decisions made by the people behind the company. So I think the notion of reading, paying attention to, and acknowledging the witness account of a whistleblower is quite important when it comes to that conversation. So that's why I wanted to make this video today. If you haven't seen it before, I would also recommend watching The Social Network. It's a 2010 film by David Fincher, which explores the origins of Facebook. And in it, Mark Zuckerberg is portrayed as being unable to reconcile the pursuit of power and profits with ethics. I show it often in my business class. I ask the students to think about the ethical dilemmas that are presented in this film. I think it's an important companion, probably, to the book. If you haven't seen The Social Network, it's excellent and probably worth rewatching. if you've watched it before, and watching if you've never seen it before. So thanks everyone so much for listening to me discuss Careless People today. If you have any reactions, thoughts, comments that you would like to share, please do so in the comments section below. I love getting into conversations about books, and I think that this is a very important conversation for us to be having. I know that the world feels more in danger than ever before because of recent events. I do think that this plays an important part in the conversation about limiting speech, censoring speech, hate speech, and all of the concerns that we're dealing with right now in the present day. So yeah, thanks everyone again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye for now. I do have my students watch this movie, Sarah Winberg. I don't know if I called her Sarah Winberg. I really hope not. First, let's start with the claims that are made. The claims that so what are some of the claims that Sarah will, so what are some? The legal ruling itself is pretty explicit. The legal and shadow ban.